Good afternoon and welcome to today's event at the Center for Race and Gender, Afro-Latinx Feminisms in the URL and IRL spheres. For anyone who requires a live transcript, please click the CC button on the lower right-hand side of the screen. Let me begin with the land acknowledgement. We take a moment to recognize that Berkeley sits on the territory of the Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold the University of California, Berkeley more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. My name is Letty Volpe, and I'm the director of the Center for Race and Gender here at UC Berkeley. We're thrilled that you can be with us for today's exciting event. Before I introduce the moderator and curator of today's event and thank our co-sponsors for today, let me encourage you all to take a look at our spring event calendar full of amazing conversations you won't want to miss on indigeneity and migration, on the teeter-totter installation, on the border wall, and much more. You can find it on our website, crg.berkeley.edu. A big thank you to our generous co-sponsors for today's event, the Multicultural Community Center, the Center for Latin American Studies, Berkeley Center for New Media, and the UC Berkeley Graduate Assembly's Women of Color Initiative, Graduate Women's Project, Graduate Minority Student Project, and Sexual Orientation and Gender Advocacy Project. Let me now introduce the fabulous organizer of the Radical Kinship series and moderator of today's event, Pelaez Lopez. Alan is an Afro-Zapotec artist and scholar from Oaxaca, Mexico. They are the author of Intergalactic Travels, Poems from a Fugitive Alien, published by the Operating System 2020, which was a finalist for the 2020 International Latino Book Award, as well as To Love and Mourn in the Age of Displacement, published by Nomadic Press 2020. Thank you, and I will now turn it over to Alan.
Thank you so much, Letty. Welcome everybody to the last segment of the Radical Kinship series of this semester. So excited to be introducing both Zahira and two incredible feminist thinkers I had the privilege to first meet on the internet and then share space. Not as often as I'd like, I think maybe only twice in real life. So I wrote an introduction to their work that I want to share with you all. If at any moment I am too fast or my audio breaks up, feel free to type in the chat. So give me 1 second. Okay, so today's event, Afro-Latinx Feminisms in the URL and IRL centers the work of Dominican sociocultural critic Zahira Kelly and Garifuna writer Janel Martinez. Zahira Kelly may be known to some of you as Bad Dominicana on social media or as the creator of the 2016 hashtag Maybe He Doesn't Hit You, which provoked over 50,000 tweets within the first month and is now theorized and written about in conjunction to the Me Too movement by new media scholars. Or you might recognize her visual work, where she centers the narratives of Black women in Latin American spaces. Most cited in the Academy is Vaina Colonial, where she outlines the specific ways in which settler colonial tactics of assimilation and acculturation continue to limit the livelihoods of Black women in the Caribbean and Latin America. Joining her is Janel Martinez, a Bronx-raised Garifuna writer whose work demonstrates a commitment not only to Black people in Latin America and the Caribbean, but an ethical approach to writing about a community that is often assumed to have a singular story. Her writing echoes the poetic sensibilities of Colombian writer Mari Grueso Romero, Afro-Puerto Rican writer and scholar Mayra Santos Febres, and Afro-Peruvian cultural worker Victoria Santa Cruz, who, like Martinez, renounce hyphenated identities that do not first and foremost center the Black woman. I would say that Janel Martinez is a community archivist and a digital librarian whose work expands from Black women's health, Afro-Indigenous politics in Central America, Black joy, and like today's topic, Afro-feminist politics. It is my pleasure to present to you and introduce to you Janel Martinez. If you can share a little bit about how you have used social media or the internet to develop a Black feminist critique or a Black feminist community.
And this question is for me, for both of us.
For both of you, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, if you can both talk to the ways in which you have used social media to develop a Black feminist community, yeah.
You want to go first, Janel?
Yeah, I'll dive in. So I think in the beginning, honestly, social media was more of like community for, looking for a community essentially, right? Not necessarily in keeping in mind like, building out something. It was more of like, oh, okay. And I'm thinking back to my undergrad years where like I was, somewhat looking for outside of my own family and friendship space, terminology, experiences that really kind of hit home for myself. So I'm grateful to have, and I have to always, note this, like seeing on Tumblr, Zahira, your work, and seeing many of the works that were happening like I think, a lot of what we're seeing today. And so it was really just those beginnings of looking and searching for spaces that felt like home in the digital realm. But then kind of coupling with the fact that, being in media and being a storyteller and kind of being sick of seeing the same old narrative that was very exclusive and, erasure of, Black folk of Latin American descent, Indigenous folk as well. And so for me, wanting to kind of create a space for, Black women of Latin American descent, many of the focus oftentimes I was just not seeing, particularly in media, like some of these traditional media outlets. And so it was really like kind of like that homegrown, like, okay, I'm just gonna create a website and see what happens. And it was really from there, like sharing experiences, my own, sharing other people's experiences, and then also segueing into those sort of media spaces and saying like, hey, like this is ridiculous that you would not, center our narratives. But it was really started off in like, we need spaces for our stories. And I would like to be able to like pass, the mic and be able to like focus on that. So I think that's really, where it really started. And it's kind of wild to see where things have ended, or not ended, but where things are now.
Thank you, Janelle. I also remember when you popped up on the scene, I was just so relieved, like, oh my God, thank you so much. We really need this. And I think that that is sort of what drove me all of the time. I did start on Tumblr, yelling into the void. I didn't even expect anybody to care, but I just knew that I needed a space where I could sort of um, like pull the threads apart of what it was to be like, or what it is to be not just a woman, femme, but like, you know, Latin American, Dominican, Black, and all of these other things. Just like I felt that there was no space pretty much anywhere. Um, while Black people have always been my community, it's like there was always a sense of like alienation at the same time for being Latin American. And it's like with Latin American spaces, it's just with Latin American spaces, it's just an absence of Black people in general. Black women are just not seen. Um, so for me, being able to find that community um, on Tumblr was like really major. I found Black feminists from around the diaspora, not just Latin America. And I found a bunch of Black women from Latin America as well. That was like, but it was like basically a matter of, I just really needed to get things off my chest and tell my own stories as well. It's like storytelling, but like, tell me, is that not incredibly ancestral for us to be so focused on storytelling, you know, to this day? That is how we pass on knowledge. That is how we've been passing on history and the things that are important to us, our values, the things that we go through, you know? So it's like the fact that we use the internet for that, it's just like, you know, I would compare it to electronic drum patterns in production, the way that we're just being African as fuck, but like with technical equipment, for example, we're being African as fuck by focusing on storytelling to build community and get our points across and do our form of protest on the internet. So that's like where my sense of Black community has begun. Like it started honestly on hair care boards because I have like type 4 hair, and that's like such a very specific, you know, way to care for your hair, and it's very specific struggle. It comes with like a lot of violence to have type 4 hair, you know. And when I found these communities of Black women on the internet that were all talking about the same things, we were from all over the world and we were all talking about the same exact woes. It was just kind of like that shit like really hit me, where it's just like, yo, like Black girls around the world are really all going through the same shit, and like the difference is the geographical location, and we are always forming like these strong ass fucking bonds and communities just out of nothing and out of nowhere. Like that's like part of how we've survived, but it's also very ancestral as well, you know. For us to be like so tight knit about the things that unite us, regardless of where we come from. So I guess for me, like Black Latina feminism still feels kind of lonely in some ways. Like I know so many amazing people, but we're not enough. It's still not enough. It still feels like, you know, we're talking about exceptions or something as to who you even have the access to know about, basically. So I don't know, for me, it was just like also accessibility, like the internet, I could access it no matter what was going on in my life. And of course, that takes money, but it's like, you know, it's also like when I was disabled or when I was going through just like very like rough situations or whatever, the internet is like how I sort of leveled those things out and like sort of tried to make sense of things. And I found I made community because the things that I was going through is stuff that other people are also going through. You know what I'm saying? None of it has ever been theory. It's always stuff that I live. Um, so I don't know. For me, like that's just sort of what it's been. It's been unintentional. It's been honestly very organic and natural. for me, because I think that that's our legacy.
Thank you. One of the things that really strikes me about both of you is that you started talking about Black Latinidad on Tumblr, right? On these social media applications that people don't necessarily see as scholarly or as a place where everything is being produced. Zahida, I have a question for you. You go as Bad Dominicana on the internet. And one of the things that I have noticed in academic spaces is that a lot of people talk about your work in relationship to the collection of essays, Bad Feminist, that came out in 2014. And sometimes people try and I want to see if you can talk a little bit about, okay, and I want to see if you can talk a little bit about the development of Bad Dominicana. How did you come to that
Sorry,
name?
for a second, yeah. Can you start your question where you left off at Bad Feminist? Because you kind of like broke up, so I didn't hear the rest. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. It is my internet. So people talk about your work in relationship to Roxane Gay's Bad Feminist, which was a 2014 collection of essays. But Bad Dominicana actually was alive on the internet pre-2015. And I want to see if you can talk about how you started Bad Dominicana, why Bad Dominicana as a name. And then Janel, if you can talk about why Ain't I Latina, which is the platform that you started that kind of skyrocketed.
Oh, okay. So first, the internet for me has always been a space for me to get shit off of my chest and be angry about the things that I'm righteously angry about. Be cutting about it. And just address the things that maybe in other places or spaces, like I wasn't allowed to say out loud, you know? So the name Bad Dominicana, you know, when I began my Tumblr, it was actually Soy Dulce de Leche. And that had nothing interesting other than it was just because my skin tone is a little bit like dulce de leche, and that's literally it, which you can call problematic or whatever, but I wasn't thinking deeply into it. However, as soon as I started addressing anti-Blackness, feminist concepts, basically homophobia, transphobia, and the likes, I started getting hate mail from Dominicans, calling me a bad Dominican, a bad example of Dominicans, an embarrassment for them, because I guess a good Dominican woman would be the opposite of all those things I would just name. A good Dominican woman is okay with anti-Blackness and doesn't mention it. A good Dominican woman does not complain about the machismo. You just go along with it and be good, right? A good Dominican woman engages and lets people be homophobic as they want to be, and as transphobic as they want to be. A good Dominican woman does not show her body or talk about sexuality or anything like that, because we're supposed to be very prudish and chaste or whatever. So it's like I just happen to be all of the bad things, and I'm okay with that. I don't want to be a good Dominican woman. So that's actually where Bad Dominicana came from. Some people think that it's because like, oh, like a bad bitch or something. It's like, no, like, I mean bad, like literally like terrible. I'm a terrible example of fucking Dominican. For any Dominicans out there angry right now, I don't represent you. Don't worry about that. I only represent me. You do you, honey. Okay.
Yeah. So with Ain't I Latina, this is such an interesting question, because my thoughts around some of it have shifted since starting the platform. But essentially, when I was thinking of a name for a platform, I wanted it to be intentionally a question, right? This question of like, in terms of identity, am I not this, right? Even though that I am a Black person, a Black Indigenous person within this, like, why is my narrative not necessarily centered? Like, it was sort of like an answer to that. And I must say that I was also partly inspired by like Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman. A lot of, I will say, some of my, just like my understanding of things came out of experiences I've had learning about like it being ingrained in like Black studies, a lot of it being African-American centered, but so that kind of played into me deciding on that name. And so that was like 8 years ago, basically, now that I think about it. And it really just centered on the fact that, like, let's ask this question, like, do you not see me? And this is, I'm projecting as to what I was thinking at the time. Like, do you not see me as, you know, Latina because of my skin, because of, you know, how I present? Now, looking at that, because people ask me sometimes, like, oh, like, how does that name resonate with you? It still, I will say, holds the same in the sense that the focus has always been Black women, right? And highlighting Black women of all experiences on the platform. But I'm not fixated on the term Latina, right? That's not a term that I go by personally. That is not a term that I think a lot of us at this stage of the game, and not a game as like, you know, but like in this, you know, time, you know, there's a lot that comes with it. And so I think that the mission of it still remains, right? We're still making sure that we're giving the spotlight to, you know, Afro-Latinx womanhood, centering that. But I do want to note that that term specifically is not one that can be discussed without a lot of the feelings around it, and what even the term Afro-Latina, but that won't throw that in there right now, because, but yeah, that's where that's what my thoughts are around it.
Thank you. That actually brings me to the next question, as I was going to ask the both of you, because Janel, 2018, you published a piece that talked about why you no longer identify as Afro-Latina and you're kind of centering your Blackness. And Zahida, I've also seen you on the internet tweet about your Blackness and decentering Latinidad. I'm wondering if both of you can talk about the limits of the category Afro-Latinx and why you have both pushed towards other ways of identifying and moving in social media spaces.
For me, I was okay with it at first because it felt like it was something similar to Black American, you know, which is just signifying I come from this like place, this geographical location, but I'm a Black person from that geographical location. However, it's been sort of morphed to mean like I'm a white person with some curls, and I just suspect I might have some Black ancestry, or maybe my great granddaddy was, or something like that. So I'm Afro-Latina, not Black, Afro-Latina. And then it's just like, it was always supposed to be that you're just a Black person from Latin America. And because that's just gotten so convoluted and I'm not attached to Latinidad anymore anyway, I know that as that's a geographical location, there's a value to recognizing the similarities between us, you know? I also feel that that's a term that's never served us and it never will. So I'm moving away from that. Just call me Black, just call me negra. I'm okay with that. Like, I'm cool with y'all, ambiguous non-Black Latinos who would have never been considered Black in any place or space can keep the term Afro-Latino if you want. By the way, you could have just said that you have some Afro descendants. You didn't have to do all that, but you chose to do it. So now this is where we at. Just call me Black. I'm good with that.
Yes, heavy cosign, because it actually, it can be a little bit, and it gets me angry when I think about it, because I think about how just as Black people, we find things, we create things, and it gets co-opted, right? And I think that the term was designed for people who are racialized, are unambiguously Black. And what I find most alarming about it, and why I really had to sit with the fact that this ain't it for me, is really the commercialization of it, right? We're talking about, as even in this conversation, community building, things that were predate, 2015. And even these conversations, when we think about like our ancestors and, people who have been like affirming Blackness across Latin America, across the Caribbean. But it got to a point specifically where media, I think they play a huge role in this, of interest in this narrative. And then we saw like advertisers like, oh, okay, and then that's when I started seeing like, oh, it's cool because, I wanna possibly, sell this or that. And, my hair, I spritz it and it curls a little. So now I'm claiming, like, if you can't, and I know we've all through, work have said this in one way, shape, or form, but like, if you're not able to swap out Afro-Latinx with Black, then what is the need to use the term? And because I've always been Black, yes, I did find home in, the term Afro-Latina, but I know that I will always be and find a home in Black because that's who I've always been. So that's just the term that I'm going to continue using. And also because we're talking about like diasporic Blackness, like, yes, there is nuance, but you could find me on any, any space or place. And if I'm next to a Black person, like, we're just Black. So for me, it really was, I think I was at a angry place when I wrote that. And not so much angry, but I do think that it's really unfortunate that we see this with many of the things that we create. We don't get credit, or there's attempts to take it over, and it's just unfortunate. But they can definitely, like, if they want to use it, whatever, because they ain't gonna say Black, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing from the two of you is that there's a difference between being Afro-descendant and being Black. And being Afro-descendant is somebody who, like, somewhere in their lineage has like a Black relative. That a lot of people in a lot of US-based Latinxes are taking up and identifying as Afro-Latinx. And then this leads me to oh my goodness, did I freeze again? Okay, sorry, my internet is pretty bad today, so I'm getting pieces here and there. But this leads me to also the ways in which the academy, like you said, Janelle, like, Afro-Latinidad has been advertised, but I think that the academy is also doing something like that. For example, I'm from Mexico, and the term Afro-Mexican or Afro-descendant isn't a thing that people know back home. In my village, if somebody says, oh, are you Afro-Mexican? Anybody in my family would be like, what is that? Or if you say, are you Afro-descendant? They'll be like, what is that? Because where I come from, it's like, they're just like, oh, eres negro or eres negra, right? These terms don't exist in some geographies. And I think that the academy is also insisting on this singular identifier that just don't make sense based on how we were assimilated into whatever nation state we're living in, and how we have been disciplined. And I think that the academy and the media don't ever take into consideration discipline. And the two of you, that's one of your main things. Like, you both look at how gender is disciplined. And I think that, Zahira, in a lot of your work, you also look at queerness. And I'm wondering if the two of you can speak to how queerness has influenced and nuanced how we understand Afro-Latinidad.
I have definitely thought about the way that Blackness is laid out and how it is almost like, and you know, a lot of people have spoken about this, but in Latin America, it's also the same. It's just like Blackness is queered just for being Black, pretty much. I identify as non-binary. I'm also queer. And it's like, I haven't had a choice in navigating basically what femininity is supposed to look like, what masculinity is supposed to mean, in the ways that I'm supposedly always masculine because I'm a Black woman. The ways that femininity seems so unattainable, and it's also like, it means that people literally treat me better if I'm more feminine because I'm still getting closer to this white ideal of what femininity is supposed to be, you know, versus when I'm presenting as more masculine. Like, those are things that I've had to process. I've had to process the ways that, like, when I'm presenting as masculine, I'm read as sort of like criminal, and that's like about how I'm Black and a masculine person. I'm read as more of a threat, and people are so much more aggressive with me for no fucking reason, you know? It makes me fear presenting in that way because I notice that the more high femme I go, the better people treat me, you know? And it's like I have no choice but to examine just the relation to whiteness and to white conceptions of gender. I only think about always how I've been in these rooms on Clubhouse, which I mean can really go either way. It can be terrible, it can be great. But it's rooms run by African women, and they're all speaking so passionately in ways that in any other spaces would be called aggressive. But because everybody in there is an African woman and understands that that's not aggression, that we're passionate people and we mean what we say, and we might be angry about it. And that doesn't mean that, like, you know, we're a danger or a threat that we need to be policed. And it's just like the fact that we can hold space for people who speak differently in those ways is also about gender to me. You know, it's not just about race and policing us as Black women. It's like policing us according to a white version of gender. And I come from a country that's like so queerphobic that like it's like there's not the concept of out queer women is just, it doesn't exist. You might see some boys here and there and the occasional trans person, but it's like it's still very much so taboo, and it's like just it's seen as so outside of the scope. There's all these theories about how that's supposed to be a conspiracy to ruin, you know, or lessen our numbers or something like that. So it's just like the acceptance of white queerness, you know, in so many more spaces, whereas we're always deviant. There's no escaping that for me.
I think and I'm still kind of like processing and thinking about the question, but for myself, I know that when I look at like my chosen family or friend group, a lot of my, you know, friends, because I know I have to say that I am, you know, digested as cis, straight, you know, also petite, like all these different things that can be in alignment with, you know, seen as palatable or whatever the case may be. But I feel like when I think about many of the people who I consider, you know, in my, you know, in my community, basically, they have sort of forced me to rethink and reimagine a lot of the definitions and pushing the boundaries of just what society tells us as is the norm or is acceptable. And I think I have been able to sort of lean into that with, you know, the work that I am doing and making sure that when I am essentially highlighting identity, that I am truly being as inclusive as possible. And I must say that there's, you know, more work to be done with that. But for me, that's like how I'm trying to approach it. I hope, does that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that when listening to the two of you, I think about how in one of the previous answers, you both talked about the difference between being Afro-descendant and being Black. And I think that when one is Black in Latin America, one doesn't have a closet to come out of, right? Because it's like in Latin America, if you're Black, you're told that you are Black. And I think that when we think about queer folk who are Black from Latin America, it's like, what is the point of sometimes coming out when that closet was never afforded to us? I think that Latin Americans who are not Black might have a closet that they can hide in. Not hide in, but a closet that might temporarily protect them, even if so for like a couple of minutes, right? But I think that when one is Black in Latin America and is already assumed the other or the foreigner, then that closet can never exist. And I think a lot about the ways in which a lot of light-skinned Black Latin Americans are recently like coming out and showing photographs of like their parents, or like, oh, look, I'm Black. And how little it's thinking through one, colorism, but also the ways in which queer communities have found ways in Latin America to exist and resist without ever needing to come out. I think that in the US, there's this narrative of like coming out is powerful and you have to do it to be liberated. But in Latin America, there's so many people that are not out in the traditional ways that they are out in the US, but are still like thriving in their own way and creating ecosystems of care. And I see that, for example, Zahira, in your documentary, is it Valerie and I'm forgetting the name of the other person, Manku? You're muted.
Maku.
Maku, like in your documentary of Valerie and Maku in Colombia, right? How they're just talking about their Blackness. And it's like, yes, we all know that they're like trans/non-binary people, but like that doesn't come up as often because for them, there's no need for them to talk about it because their Blackness has already made them queer in Colombia. Or Janel, when I think about your work as a person who is Garifuna, right, who is Afro-Indigenous, it's like Afro-Indigeneity is not meant to exist in a lot of spaces in the US. And I think that that also brings this queer understanding to Latinidad that people don't know how to talk about. And I'm wondering for the two of you, still thinking about queerness, still thinking about Blackness as opposed to Afro-Latinx, what is it that you need in order for you to have a better future, a safer future? What do Black Latin American people in your community need from Latin American people who are not Black?
For me, and I've definitely said this before, but the prospect and concept of having my own home after being landless and displaced for so many years is like on the forefront of my mind, to where I wonder who I would be and what my days would look like and what my aspirations would look like, what my daily activities would look like if I wasn't so focused on that. We're very lacking in terms of equal access to secure housing. It's like on the most basic levels, like we're just sort of left hanging. Like we live in a society where that means money. So I'm gonna say money, you know? You can't have housing, food, healthcare, all of this stuff without money. Unfortunately, that's what it takes right now. And if it doesn't take that, then you'd at least have to come up with ways that are non-money to make up for that. And it's just like, Are y'all making sure that Black Latin Americans have the same access to making money, to those resources, to getting those houses, to getting that food, to being safe and secure and stable? Are y'all actually allying in a way that it's like you care about our safety and our security and our stability as humans, because that's like what community is supposed to do? And there's like the power dynamic where it's like y'all are the gatekeepers for all of these things. So it's like, who are you gatekeeping? So yeah, that's kind of how I think of it. It's like I would love to think about it on some like deeper esoteric level, but like, yo, the basics are still not there, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's very real. Like, as I was hearing you, Zahira, and also Alan, the question, it made me think about, and I must note that like I'm here in the US, and you know, I do think that there is some privilege that comes with that. But I do think about like my family, you know, in Honduras, specifically Garifuna communities where safety is not even, and I think being a person, a Black person, an Indigenous person, Black Indigenous person, like your safety, there's a constant like concern about that, whether that's your day to day, whether that's like you know, housing security. But I think about in Garifuna communities where that is our ancestral land, that there is literally a fight to not lose the land because of, you know, the grabs that are happening. I mean, people disappearing, like all of this sort of thing. So the very basic of safety. And I think that when like white Latinxes, how are you contributing to not for Black folks not feeling safe, whether that's in your respective countries, whether that's here, wherever you're positioned, like how are you not allowing for people to feel safe? Because there's macro level violence and then there is like, you know, micro. And I think that's everything from, you know, not checking privilege and speaking over people. We see this often happening, to not having or not sitting with your discomfort for a second, like it's going to be the end of the world for you, like not having certain conversations, not willing to like physically, financially or what have you, put yourself in a predicament where you could allow a Black person to have an opportunity. So I think that there's like a lot of different ways. But the biggest thing that I think about is safety, because it doesn't really matter where you're at. That's something that I feel like is a big concern for us across the board.
Oh my goodness, thank you for that. Like it makes me think a lot of Ariana Brown is a poet, a Black Mexican American poet, and she has a poem that ends with the question, will you fight for those you do not love? And she's talking to like other, I think part of the question is like, she's talking to other Latin Americans, like, will you fight for Black people? Because Latin Americans who are non-Black have shown that they do not love Black people, particularly because the largest population of Black folk outside of the continent of Africa is in Latin America and the Caribbean, right? So it's like, if we have the highest population of Black folk, why is it that, like you just named, Janel, why is it that Black folk are not safe in Latin America and the Caribbean? And Zahira, like you just said, like, why is it that they don't have their basic resources, right? Like, why should at home be such a big vision for a Black Latin American? And it makes me think about the fact that there's this narrative, I think, in social media and in the academy that Black Latin Americans have been silenced. And that narrative kind of upsets me, because it's like, Black Latin Americans have never not said that there's a power dynamic going on with the rest of the continent, right? Like Black Latin Americans have never been silent about their oppression. It is those who are non-Black in Latin America who are refusing to listen, those who are excluding Black Latin Americans. I think about places like Costa Rica, where Black Costa Ricans who had like a Caribbean parent, they were not allowed to have Costa Rican citizenship because one of their parents was from the Caribbean. Like that kind of anti-Blackness that like literally says you are not going to be part of like the nation, even though you were born here. All those narratives of like there's erasure, I think are super lazy. And I'm thinking for both of you, who are the Black folk in Latin America who are one giving you hope, or who really who you're trying to just learn from and learn with as we continue to fight against this idea that like we have been silenced, when in fact like we've never been silent.
For me right now, one of the most important people from my context is Joan Mihail. She's a self-described travesti, poet, theorist, just all around like groundbreaking, brilliant person when it comes to Dominican everything, and just like talking about what it is to be Black and be like, you know, not cis hetero and doing all of these things that are supposedly bad, you know, like me, like also a bad feminist. Just like what it is to live life on your own terms, no matter what that looks like in the face of people who absolutely hate you. I think that's so, so, so crucial. I also love Afro Si Guapa or Soy Si Guapa, who's also a Black Dominican who is out here basically challenging all of these structures in an accessible way for people. And it's like work that really needs to be done. Still, there's never enough of us. I'm just not of the thinking that it can only be one. Like this is not a competition. Like the more the merrier, and like they're very needed. But yeah, those are the ones that really come to mind for me.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I think there's like, because I think about the collective, like of voices, I constantly am like, there's just a number of people that, you know, come to mind. But one person, and thinking of this like in terms of like Garifunanes, you know, I've been, you know, I've not had the privilege of meeting Miriam Miranda, but really talking about someone that has put their body time and time again on the line for our people, and has done it so like fearlessly. Like I'm always amazed, you know, at her work, and that ability to like constantly do that, and the fact that like literally the government is on the hunt constantly for her. She still finds a way to be on the front lines for our people. That to me is someone that I'm always like, wow. Also, who comes to mind is a scholar that I've also had the privilege of meeting through the digital space is Pablo Lopez Oro, in conversations around, again, Garifuna identity. And I think, and I say this because they're really like, in terms of like literature, and like it was really like when I see things like Garifuna Twitter now, and I see like the Garifuna market, like it literally brings a tear to my eye, because like that was not a thing. Like people were literally like, and it's not to say that we weren't proud of our identity. Like you could pull up in the South Bronx and at any moment, like you're seeing like proud Garinagu, but to be able to like begin seeing people openly discussing, you know, this identity, storytelling, and the community is very matriarchal. So I think that's also really beautiful to see, you know, about Garifunanes. So I would say that. And then to kind of bring it to someone that I've also really admired is Dr. Marta Moreno Vega, and who is now like in Puerto Rico and just doing really dope work out there. And I will say, like, just I've always been very much so like drawn to her work, particularly her and being, you know, from El Barrio and, you know, uptown. And so I would say that. And then of course, you know, gotta give you both a shout out as well, like in the collective of voices. Like I'm really grateful for both of you. So I feel like I can go on and on, but I do want to just say, you know, I really do appreciate the collective, because so many times the collective has saved me on a like an emotional, mental level. So really appreciative.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I'll also share some of the people that I really have been leaning on and learning from. One of them is Iquillo Spiña Narvaez, who is a Black trans woman from Venezuela, and she has opened up my mind. She's currently living undocumented in Spain, and she writes a lot about what it's like to be asked for papers as a trans woman in Spain and to not have them, because I grew up undocumented in the US. And for her, it's all, what I've learned is that to be Black and trans is to always having to live in multiple worlds at the same time. Right, because it's like in Venezuela, she writes about how in Venezuela, like she had to create a different world, and she's migrated to the U.S., she's migrated to Spain, and each time she migrates, it's literally like not a new persona, but a new set of tools that she has to develop and how to move, and some of the recent work that she's writing right now, it's on the fact that like she's tired. Like she loves that people are into like speculative fiction and imagination, but she's like, I don't want to fucking have to imagine another world. I've imagined too many worlds already. Can all of you just join me in one of them? And I think that that offering of let's pick one of her worlds as a Black community and let's join that world has been kind of something that I don't take lightly, that I want to be like, yes, I want to follow you there. And I also really love the work of Yolanda Arroyo Pisarro from the island of Puerto Rico. I think that her poetry, she's a Black lesbian poet. The first time that I encountered her was shortly after the shooting at the Pulse Orlando nightclub. And she wrote this incredible rendition of the credo, the creed, and it was like centering Black islanders and how do you grieve people who the islands have not known how to grieve. It's not that they didn't want to grieve them, it's just that there haven't been opportunities in which to publicly grieve them. And I think that as I continue to move in my Blackness, it's like, how do I learn from Black feminists that have given me a framework of grief when there's grief all around me all the time, and I'm always like, oh, I can't grieve right now because I already grieved last week. Yeah, so I think that we have about 6 minutes, and I'm wondering if anybody in the audience has a question, or if Janel or Zahida, if you have a question that you might want to ask. Okay, so we have some questions in the Q&A. If we can all type the names that we said on the chat is one of the asks. And then if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them. So we have a question. Y'all are so amazing. How do you shield yourself from discrimination? Do you ever get tired of living as
The last part, do we ever get tired of what exactly? I didn't hear it. I'm sorry, it cut out.
of living as a minority? Do you ever get tired of living as a minority?
I mean, I think we've all been there. Of course, you get tired. Of course, you want to live in a world where it doesn't matter if you're the minority or the majority, or if there's 3 or 3 million of you, because you're still going to have equitable access and treatment and safety, you know? Yes, I'm absolutely tired. I'm tired every day. I was quarantining before quarantine even began, because that was the only way that I could even feel safe. So yeah, it's tiring. I think that's like a given.
Definitely in agreement. What I think kind of makes it a little mind-boggling is like a lot of times we're not even the minority, right? Like we're the majority, but we live in a society that has like structured things in a way that we, are not quote unquote entitled to rest and peace and like just living our Black lives. And I think that, so in short, absolutely yes. And that's why I am even more appreciative of spaces where we can, just have joy and relax and, not worry about what typically like is on our minds, although it's very hard to escape that for sure. Like look at what's happening around us even in this very moment. But it's really, at least try to keep joy and peace at the top of my mind if I can. But I mean, that's being realistically speaking, some days are harder than others to kind of center that.
Thank you. And we have about 2 minutes. So I'm wondering, are you two able to see the questions?
Yes.
Is there any question that you might want to ask? I want to ask you if you want to pick one. I mean, not ask, but answer.
I can't see the questions, but if you want to throw one my way, I'm good with that too.
There's a question. So there's a question about the situation between Dominicans and Haitians. Is it more a racial problem or a historical problem? That's the one question. Another question is if you have advice for an Afro-Chicana who wants to tackle anti-Blackness. Another question is if I think Black Americans can contribute to Black Latin American erasure. So any of those are up for right now.
Can you repeat the first one? Because you broke up. I'm sorry, I had to keep making you repeat yourself.
Absolutely. The first one was about the situation between Dominicans and Haitians. Is it a more racial problem or a historical?
It's absolutely racial. And you can see it in the fact that there's like public figures that are light-skinned Haitian people and people love them. If you're a white Haitian who is going to the most expensive Dominican schools, people are totally fine with you. If you're living in the very expensive Alto de Chabón or La Romana, like people are okay with that. Suddenly, those horrible anti-Black ass fucking feelings don't come up as much. So it's absolutely it's racial, it's class. It's not just historical. It is not just a historical beef because people be throwing that shit out the window if they happen to be the right color. So nah, you're not getting away with that one.
I saw a question, or the question that you threw out about Black Americans and Black Latinx erasure. Though I've always felt like I found camaraderie and like growing up, like a lot of my friends were of the Black diaspora, Black American, I will say that I'm starting to see, I don't know, there seems to be a little bit of confusion sometimes as to like who is Black when it comes to the context of like Latin American identity. Like, and I say that because in the last couple of months, especially when diversity inclusion conversations have been at an all-time high out after, you know, the uprisings of this past summer, it seems like the solution has been at times to get a, you know, quote unquote Latinx person, but not necessarily Black, right? And so it's like, y'all understand what Black looks like, right? Like we understand what Black is, but why is it sometimes that there seems to be a level of confusion, or it seems like, oh, well, we can check that box because we did, like, you know, we have someone that's Latinx that may be like mixed race and that does it, but will not tap an actual Black Latin American person, you know, to have a conversation or to, you know, think about like, oh, okay, like, what is your experience like? So I find sometimes, and this is obviously not everybody, but I have seen situations where it's been more harmful than, you know, when they could have just literally just speak to a Black Latin American person, you know, like I found that that's been the case. Or even like saying, oh, well, is this person really Black? It's like, huh? Like, again, why is there confusion? Like if this person literally is the same shade darker and there's still confusion about their Blackness, is it because of the context of Latin America? So I think that there needs to be some more self-education around that for those that are not Black of Latin American descent, and particularly Black Americans.
Thank you. I know that we are at time. I wanted to close out today by thanking both of you, Janel and Zahida. My hope for today was for us to not have that introductory conversation of like, oh, do Black people exist in Latin America? Because like, all of us are over that, right? Like Tahira, you're currently based in the Dominican Republic. Janelle, you're based in the Bronx. I'm based in California, and like I'm from like grew up in Mexico. And I really wanted to sit with you two and talk to like the nuances of our experiences. One of the things that I continue to learn from the both of you is that doesn't matter where we're having this conversation. This conversation, I think, is for us. I know that like this was a panel and that there's attendees here, but the only way that we can actually imagine a different way of moving and being is by talking with one another. So thank you for taking the time to be in community amongst the three of us. If there's any like final words that you want to say either to each other or to the audience, like these are like your last 2 minutes to do so.
I just want to say thank you for curating this space. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to for a number of weeks. And I think especially given all that's going on, like it's just feels good to be, though it is like digitally, we are in community here. So thank you for just your thoughtfulness and, you know, creating this space. And of course, you know, Zahira, always a pleasure to be in space and sharing space with you. And so just thank you both.
Yeah, I think that is also where I'm at. I'm just very grateful for this space, Alan, for you, Janelle, and I hope that y'all know that I love you, and these spaces are, it's like the only kind of places where you really feel seen sometimes. It's like we're the only ones who know how to see each other at this point. So it's just like very necessary and fulfilling. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a good rest of your evening.